The resurgence of the right in Germany, Chancellor Angela Merkel wins a fourth term, but her power is reduced. For the first time since the Nazis, a nationalist far-right party has members of parliament, and Merkel's main rival is warning her to expect strong opposition. How will the veteran leader govern this time? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Elizabeth Puranam. She was expected to win and she did, but Angela Merkel's re-election victory in Germany on Sunday is bittersweet. The Chancellor's Christian Democratic Union won 34% of seats in the Parliament and Bundestag. That's enough to be the biggest party, but not for a majority government. So she'll start talks to build a coalition. At the same time, Merkel's contending with a surge of support for the AfD. The nationalists won the largest far-right representation in Parliament since Hitler's Nazis in the 1940s. We'll get to our guests in just a moment, but first, Lawrence Lee has more from Berlin.
The most important politician in Europe, the most important female politician anywhere, the flag bearer for liberal democracy in an uncertain world. 4 wins in a row for Angela Merkel, even if her party's vote share shrunk and the far right emerged once again. It was a problem she was quick to acknowledge.
We want those AfD voters who moved to come back to us through good political work. We want to solve the problems people are facing. These might be issues of integration and illegal immigration, but there are also questions around services in rural areas, or questions of public transport, or opportunities for farmers.
As recent opinion polls had predicted, the far-right anti-immigrant Alternative for Germany, which wants to close mosques and stop immigration, took 13%, meaning more than 80 seats in Parliament. Yet they're disorganised. By Monday morning, the woman who'd led them to this position said she was so angry with the direction of the party that she would not be joining their bloc.
Such an anarchic party as we've seen in the last weeks can be successful as an opposition, but it can't offer realistic expectations of taking over the government. I have decided that I will not be part of the AfD group in the Bundestag.
The morning papers tell both these stories. The tabloids in shock at the symbolism of the far right getting into the German parliament again. The more sober media arguing it was still Merkel's night, despite some losses. A sample of opinion in central Berlin on Monday morning reflected both these views.
We are
Democrats and we have to accept it, and I'm confident they'll find a solution. I also think that after the next vote, the AfD won't be as strong anymore.
I am outraged. I'm deeply sorry. Poor Germany, too bad.
Set against recent European elections in Austria, the Netherlands and France, in which it was feared the far right might actually gain power, and given that Angela Merkel herself decided to take 1 million refugees into Germany, it is quite striking that she's actually still in power at all. Her job now is to try to dismantle the AfD's influence in the German parliament and their core argument that immigration is a threat to Germany's way of life. Once the headline writers have finished with the AfD story, expect more focus on Merkel's bigger concerns, how to deal with the US president on issues such as climate change, Iran and North Korea, as well as stabilising the European Union. The thing about Merkel, though, is that she knows how to win. Lawrence Lee, Inside Story, in Berlin.
Well, as Lawrence mentioned, Merkel's main opposition, the SPD, won the second most seats in Parliament, about 20%. The party's been in coalition with Merkel's CDU for the past 4 years, but leader Martin Schulz says that's about to change.
I stood in order to become the Chancellor, and that's why I didn't want to be a minister in the cabinet, and that's why it is correct that I recommended to the SPD leadership that we should enter into opposition.
So with that in mind, what coalitions are possible? Let's take a closer look at how the results break down. Merkel's CDU party won 34% of seats in the Bundestag. The SPD won 21%. The AfD far-right party was third with 13%. The remaining 3 parties all won around 10% of seats in Parliament. Merkel is largely expected to build her coalition with the pro-business FDP party and the Green Party. Well, let's bring in our panel who all join us from Berlin today. Dietrich von Kyaw is a retired German ambassador and former permanent representative to the EU. Torsten Benner is director of the Global Public Policy Institute, and Bethany Allen Ibrahimian is a contributing writer for Foreign Policy magazine. Welcome to you all. Ambassador von Kyaw, if I could start with you. So Chancellor Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats have won a fourth term, but given this is their worst electoral result in the post-war era, since 1949, they're down 8.6% from the last election result. Just how bittersweet a victory is this?
Well, it is, after all, a certain, though limited, triumph for Angela Merkel. For the fourth time, she is going to be in charge of the government of this country, and that's quite an achievement. On the other hand, the last government, consisting of a coalition between Christian Democrats and Social Democrats, has been clearly outvoted by the electorate, or declared as no longer worth to be repeated, because there apparently, from the point of view of many voters, or too many voters, there was too much fudging between these two partners. Another reason was probably the refugee crisis and the many people who suddenly came from neighboring countries to Germany, and where the German government had no possibility of refusing them without creating destabilizing effects in the neighborhood, the European neighborhood. And we will now be challenged to cope with it. On the other hand, Angela Merkel will have to form a government, not this time with the Social Democrats, but with Greens and Liberals. It will be difficult, but probably in the end, we will have the government.
And before we get to the most likely coalition, let's look at the other big winner in this election, the AfD. Torsten Benner, just why do you think we are seeing the most support for a far-right party that we've seen, since the end of the Second World War? Is it only down to Merkel's immigration policy?
I think it has a lot to do with immigration, that a lot of Germans who voted for the AfD, they feel culturally alienated by the changes going on. And it's not just refugees, it's the public presence of Islam, the public role of Muslims, the fact that Chancellor Merkel declared that Islam is now part of Germany. These are changes in addition to the increasing speed of technological change and how the economy is changing and making life more difficult for everybody, that a lot of people don't necessarily like, and they resent, and they kind of identify Mrs. Merkel and the coalition government with promoting these kind of changes. And they said the AfD gives us a channel to express our frustration. 60% of AfD voters, I think that's important, they said that they didn't necessarily vote for the AfD because they're convinced about the party's platform, but to express their protest against what's going on, how unhappy they are with the Grand Coalition, their way of doing business.
Bethany Allen Ibrahimian, does the AfD's success in this election mean that they are going to be the third force in German politics? Is that a given at this point?
Well, it's not, because it's unclear now what coalition is going to form. Originally, there was a strong chance that the AfD would be, in fact, the leader of the opposition in the German parliament. That had many members of the Bundestag, their staffers, and German society in general very alarmed. The leader of the opposition has a lot of rhetorical power. They get to speak right after the Chancellor speaks. They get to chair certain powerful committees. But it seems now that despite coming in as Germany's third largest party, they will not be the leader of the opposition, because the SPD has said that they will not go into coalition again with the CDU. That means that the SPD will be leader of the opposition, that will reduce the power of the AFD in parliament. They're not going to have any direct lawmaking power. Their power is going to come from being able to use the machinery of the Bundestag and the resources of the Bundestag to spread and legitimize their message. Now, how Angela Merkel is able to respond to that, that's something that we're watching very closely to see. And in fact, Alexander Gauland, who last night after the AFD won, he's the co-chair, co-founder, he said, we will hunt Merkel. So they have her in their spotlight, and we'll have to see exactly how she responds. What we've seen in other countries, the UK being the best example, is that even when the far-right party doesn't win, is not in government per se, they're able to influence the governing party. With Theresa May, she's not a member of UKIP, the far-right party in the UK, but she is guiding Brexit, which was the UKIP position. So will Merkel co-opt, as she famously does, positions that are held by the AFD and use that to legitimate her own chancellorship? And if so, will that pull Germany further to the right? That's the kind of power that the AFD might have. We'll have to wait and see.
Well, we will have to wait and see just how much power the AFD will have. We've already had the leader say on Monday morning that she won't sit with the party in Parliament. I mean, what does that mean for the party, Torsten Benner?
I mean, the party is famous for its infighting among the top brass, and it is also very factionalist. There's a stark division between conservative nationalist forces within the AFD and more extreme right-wing forces. So what we saw today, that actually the leader of the party said, I will not sit with the parliamentary group because I'm unhappy with the direction the party is headed, may be a harbinger of further turmoil, but we cannot be sure that the AFD will self-destruct. As we said, as we heard, they get a lot of resources being in parliament now. They even get to start their own party foundation. And Germans really need to smarten up dealing with the AFD, because for too long people have said these are just neo-Nazis, which they're not, most of them at least. And we've fallen into the trap of just discussing the issues that the AFD cares about, much rather than the rest of German parties setting the agenda about the topics that really matter for Germany's future prosperity, and offering pressing alternatives to that, and alternative positions. And that the Social Democratic Party, the second largest party, is actually now going into the opposition, and they're forming a credible alternative to what will likely be a new governing coalition. I mean, that may be a positive start for having better alternatives or more starker alternatives within the democratic spectrum.
Ambassador von Kyaw, the biggest loser in this election seems to be the Social Democrats, with just 21% of the vote. Why would they rather be in opposition than be part of the government?
Well, because they have, over the last 3 legislative periods, they have consistently, by being in coalition with the CDU, they have lost in votes. And therefore, they feel that they have to restart, to reorganize themselves, to refine themselves, and change maybe even somewhat their program. In any case, they need a period of opposition in order to reorganize. And that's their point of view. It's maybe regrettable from a point of view of promoting German interests in the world and in Europe, but this is it, and one has probably to accept this, at least for the time being. What now has to be recognized, reality is that half, at least, of the voters of the rightist AFD are protest voters. They are not adherents of fascist or neo-Nazi ideas. They are protest voters. And these protest voters are protests against the policies of the Grand Coalition, and they can be regained by the other democratic parties. And even if you would take the 13% for granted, it still makes 87% of Germans not being pro-Nazi or pro-fascist. That means we are talking about something which is not the real major problem of today's Germany and of today's Europe. We are facing the need to build an effective government without the Social Democrats now. Angela Merkel must prove that she can handle this challenge. She has handled many, why not this one? And then we have to find a way to promote European integration by close cooperation with France, which will not be easier as a result of this election, but can still be done. And this is what is our priority now.
Bethany Allen Ibrahimian, just how much of a priority do you think it is for now for Ms. Merkel to bring back some of those voters, many who have left, and can she do that with the coalition of the Free Democrats and the Green Party, which looks like the most likely coalition to be formed?
Well, right now, I don't know if that is her top priority. I think Merkel's top priority is to, like you said, form a coalition. It's by no means a done deal that she will be able to form a stable coalition between the Greens, the CDU, and the FDP. And I think right now that is her top priority. And the AfD doesn't have anything to do with that. Now, later on, assuming that there is a stable coalition and she's getting down to the business of governing and addressing the divisions that have, grown in her country over the past 2 to 3 years, then I believe we may see her making attempts to reach out in some ways to the more moderate AfD voters. I don't expect we're ever going to see, from Merkel any of the rhetoric that we've seen, the anti-Islamic rhetoric or the kind of purely racist rhetoric. We won't see that from her. But she faces a real dilemma, because if she is seen to be, reaching out to the AfD too much, then perhaps people on the left, the Green Party, the SPD, will use that to criticize her very harshly, and she may alienate voters on the left. That's really the fine line that she's going to have to walk. She's walked fine lines before, but that perhaps will be one of her biggest challenges, going forward.
Torsten Benner, just how much of a challenge do you think it will be for Ms. Merkel to form this coalition with the Free Democrats and the Greens, who not only dislike each other, but don't want to upset or alienate their voters?
Germany's largest newspaper called last night a nightmare victory for Mrs. Merkel, and I think that sums it up quite nicely, because it will be very tricky for her to form this coalition. Not only does she need to reconcile the interests of the pro-business Free Democrats and the Green Party that have stark differences on issues such as energy policy and Eurozone reform, but she also needs to deal with her frenemy in Munich, Prime Minister Horst Seehofer of the Christian Social Union, who is very much up in arms because his party lost badly yesterday. He needs to stand in state elections in Bavaria next year, and he already said that the CDU-CSU needs to close the right flank. So he wants to pull the party to the right. That will not go down nicely with the Green Party, and on some issues also not with the Free Democrats. Mrs. Merkel is also very unlikely to win back a lot of voters from the AfD, because for just a lot of them she is the symbol of the Chancellor who illegally let in millions of refugees, many believe, and who said that Islam is a part of Germany. So I think, if anything, there'll be a contest for who will be successor as party leader and next candidate for the CDU. And there may well be alternatives that position themselves much more to the right with a much more conservative message. And that would open up space again for the Social Democrats on the center-left to provide a clear alternative, and then you would have a competition again between the two major parties with different views, because right now Mrs. Merkel had turned the Christian Democratic Union into sort of a second social democratic party programmatically.
Ambassador von Kyaw, let me bring you in now on the implications of this election for the rest of Europe, because of course there are implications. Do you think the British government, let's start with Britain, will they be breathing a sigh of relief that the Social Democrats will not be part of this government, given what Martin Schulz has said in the past, his stance on Brexit, you know, threatening the hardest Brexit possible when he was president of the EU Parliament?
I don't think that will make that much of a difference. The future of the negotiations depend, as far as we in Berlin see it, primarily on the Brits. Whether they get their act together in negotiating seriously. And as long as they are divided among themselves, and even more so within the Conservative Party, it's going to be very, very difficult to come to a positive conclusion, regardless of whether our Social Democrats are in government or not. So the ball is in the court on the other side of the channel, and on the German side, we are willing to find a fair deal with the United Kingdom on Brexit, provided this doesn't end up with reason picking, in the sense that the result makes an invitation to other members of the European Union to imitate the British example. So everything remains to be seen, and I don't think it has that much to do with our election.
Bethany Allen Ibrahimian, what about the government, the election result, and what it means vis-a-vis the EU? Can we expect a heated debate now on Eurozone integration as the coalition forms?
I think initially, no. Primarily, the results of this election have far more implications for domestic German policy than for broader EU discussions. However, one thing that many analysts and average Germans have felt over the past few years, the grand coalition between the SPD and the CDU has kind of centralized debate, and it's kind of tamed debate, so that there hasn't been as rigorous a discussion about really important issues such as the Eurozone, such as integration, and so. This would be a minority opinion among analysts, but some think that it actually might be positive to have a more diverse the more diverse kind of occasionally nasty debate that the AfD will bring, because the AfD, members have and their key politicians have brought up the issue. Perhaps Germany shouldn't strong arm countries like Greece when it comes to their debt. Maybe that shouldn't happen. So perhaps, depending on how debate goes in the German parliament and how Merkel deals with it, maybe she will find it, she will open up the discussion more. Maybe she will respond to those criticisms.
Mr. Benner, I can see you wanting to come in there.
The likely Jamaica coalition does have major implications on Eurozone. On general EU policy, all coalition partners are in favor of European security, European defense, and the intergovernmental approach for promoting European integration. So that's all fine. On Eurozone issues, there's a major debate looming, because the leader of the Free Democrats that scored a major victory with more than 10% after being out of parliament, he drew what he called his red lines. He said he is totally opposed to a significant Eurozone budget that Mr. Macron has talked about, and that Mr. Macron is planning to unveil his plan in greater detail in his speech tomorrow. So that puts him at odds with the Greens. Mrs. Merkel was lukewarm on this at best. And now it looks like Germany will not be able to join France on a major initiative in terms of making the Eurozone more viable, moving it into a direction that there be more kind of commonly funded investment in the Eurozone. So indeed, there's a major debate looming, and a lot of other European countries that weren't happy or haven't been very happy with the German approach are watching this with significant concern.
All right, there is so much more to talk about, but I'm afraid that's all the time we have today, so we have to thank all our guests. Dietrich von Kyaw, Torsten Benner and Bethany Allen Ibrahimian. And thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Elizabeth Puranam, and the whole team here, bye for now.